Without further ado, I would just like to give this introduction to Tiber, because Tiber has conducted over a decade of field work among the Scots Gaelic speakers in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, and the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. And he's investigating the relationship between language, music, and the construction of community through socially rooted forms of local knowledge as expressed, transmitted, and maintained by Gaels on both sides of the Atlantic. He recently joined UCD as a lecturer here with us in Folklore and Ethnology in the School of Irish Celtic Studies and Folklore, joining us from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he was the inaugural holder of Scottish Heritage USA Visiting Lectureship in Scots Gaelic Studies, and where he taught in UNC's Folklore curriculum. He holds a PhD and an MScR from the University of Edinburgh, as well as an Honours BA in Celtic Studies from St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia. We see here his PhD dissertation, Tigea, coming from the Centre in Ethnography of Sensory Metaphor on Scots Gaelic Communal Aesthetics. He investigates the functional ability of Seanchas-based metaphors in conveying an embodied understanding of the aesthetics of song, storytelling, instrument. So without further ado, Tiber, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you for inviting me. It's been hard I've really enjoyed the ability to connect in the classroom, but I'm missing you all in Dublin. We're so much looking forward to the day that we're finally there with you. So Kelly asked me to talk a little bit about some of my PhD research, and I've tried to weave it together with some offshoot research that I'm trying to put together. I can't wait to see Chris Dorr someday in the archives again to follow up on some motifs that I'm interested in some legends tied to this. But this idea of disenchantment and like this crossing between enchanted and sort of everyday experience. Yeah. I thought a good way to start, we're going to go to Cape Breton in a moment, but I thought the best way to start is with the end of something. So this is one of my favorite folk tales, Láthair. It's a version of ATU 709 of Snow White that was told by Sarah Macmillan and collected by Lady Evelyn Stewart. And it's one of my favorite endings of these sort of semi-formulaic closings that we get where the storyteller puts themselves as a trekker, as a passenger through the folk tale, from the realm of the tale itself back to the realm of the community that they're sitting and reciting the tale with. And of course, at the end of every folk tale, there's this big happy wedding that was kept up for bliadhna agus a year and a day. And it finishes off, agus huair mis a broken pipe around, cowser gwanyachan, criminine reilek, brochen cruilek, Cóta mór agus cóta gorach blach. So I got this, and it's this lovely that you get this in Irish folktales and Scottish Gaelic folktales, the paper shoes that wash off in the stream. And then, so we have this, and I got these magical things in the enchanted realm, but I hadn't gone far. Chajech miach gorach, dara hooch mi is vrishta and cowser gwanyachan, gorst and cóta gorach blach, lave and chim an eilek, agus so everything becomes disenchanted all of a sudden, and we have these structures to experience. They'll go into that fairy realm, the fairy tale, wondrous realm of the wonder tale, back into our everyday lives. And I'm going to say even more so, we're going to be looking at some legends where those barriers are broken down even further, where it knocks right on your door. All I had was gone, and I was poor as I was to start with. I was left with nothing, and I left them there, skakmi and shinat. So we have these formulaic endings, these lovely turns of phrase. And Alasdair Johnson, who was interviewed by, he appeared when Angus John MacDonald, who was an undergrad at Aberdeen University, a native of North Uist, was doing summer schoolwork for the School of Scottish Studies after a lot of the great U.S. storytellers had just passed away, and we thought there might not be any left. And he went to a group of thatched houses just in the Iarchéime area of northern South Uist, and came upon Donald Alasdair Johnson, who ended up having these stories that go back to the collections of John Francis Campbell, that you can see generations of experience. Donald Archie wrote an amazing article looking at 3 generations of storytellers in Donald Alasdair's family, with himself being that last generation. But what was given a lot of attention by Donald Archie and Alan Bruford and others, and ties into research done by Vivian Labrie on the visualization of tales, is that these stories were experienced in that sensory way. They were seen. And I'll just play a little bit of his discussion on visual memory with Donald Archie.
Maar ik ben dat haar je baba maar hier natuurlijk maar waarom dat wel doen. Ja, als je kan echt niet hier alleen. Maar zeg, weet je, maar ik ben hier kan weg dan moet je wel moet je maar van de picture en zo is het goed. Veel moet ook weg dat je al dan van jou gaan pech of zo. Zie, hoe maar ik ben ja wel dan was er wel gaan dat goed, maar Abo, change that, but being kind of well on here, change it, Marabat, a change to this, Marabat, Buddha, so that
No, so this ability to visualize the tale. And the late John McInnes and I mean, this was him talking, there's a few ellipses here, but this is John McInnes, Ian McGuinness, the former senior lecturer at the School of Scottish Study, the legend, talking off the top of his head about our sensory experience, and the còig fan, or the Gaelic for the 5 senses, or the first feelings, the 5 first feelings. And he said, my cosmology is this, that what we call the rational mind or the intellect, they're all metaphors. Ultimate reality is full of stench and fragrance and beautiful vision and ugliness and all of it. It's the ultimate perception of the human being, where through na còig fan, the 5 senses, we bring with our brains, with our bodies, ideas into reality, and it's ultimate to us. It's our ultimate reality. We think of them in terms of the body, the whole body, and all the 5 senses na còig fan, or the first feelings or reasons, as he glosses it. And this idea of spatial vision. Everything is physical. What we call by the metaphor of the intellect or the rational mind, these are all physical terms that come from the clamoring of the heart. Spatial vision, tactility, for example, are a development of or cognate with what we would say fhios, fashk, near. Our perception has distance as well as feeling and hearing and smelling and all the rest. So these intangible forms of cultural expression, like the folktale, are experienced with our senses. Donald Alasdair Johnson is doing what is innately human in the way in which we engage with our expressive culture. This is only a short distance from me. Wait a little distance from me, meaning temporal, space, and they're all time and space involved and involuted in the most extraordinary way. And that was McInnes just talking off the top of his head. One other quote that I really like from Joe Neil McNeill, O'Sneil Vic, who was one of the most extraordinary storytellers in Scottish Gaelic tradition, recorded by John Shaw, and very late when we consider about it. And an extraordinary individual in that he was not born into a Gaelic-speaking community, but adopted into it, and came to become emblematic of that community. And he has this lovely discussion here of the kind of unity that was created in the context in which stories were told. This unity that was not just a physical one, but a spiritual one, and something that I think we all are thinking about even more so in our current circumstances.
Seanchas, agus van halach van mánach, van het doenje unichtje, van doelkroa unichtje, na va unichtje na fel, agus na spirit. Agus feit mi haast gro yn caelig mahas an unach ag na doonja as an gwmar an talachag agus gro gan gwmar drw ia chele an an garches agus na fel agus na spirit agus gyda he cael môr yn bevechs yn feral gyda diolch ag an wyr mash gyda fas go gan.
And that's something we're going to hear repeated in a couple excerpts from my own fieldwork of this idea of harut and a fast gown, a show. These things are getting scarce. So I wanted to talk a bit about the people I had the pleasure of being mentored by, and I consider them my almost like foster parents for when I was learning and doing field work, who many of whom are no longer with us. Thankfully, Anna still is, and I'm feeling very distant at this time, not being able to have gotten to Cape Breton, not for the over a year now, and not being able to visit with people there. Teresa, so that's Anna here. Can you see my cursor? Anna's right here. Teresa. Tresek nín fetter, so that's Auna Nini and Alasdair Clunishik Alan Vaur. This is Tresek nín fetter Vaur, Stefan Vichel, agus Anianechia Morak, who was my Gaelic tutor when I was undergrad at St. FX. And they had both of them very beautiful Gaelic. Joe Peter McLean here, so we're going Jeschel, an amazing fiddler and Gaelic speaker who passed away very suddenly in 2013. And passed away on the same day as him, and they weren't related, but they were very good friends, was Peter Jack McLean, who was just going into his 100th year and had spent a lot of time learning songs from his mother, and worked for a while in the Boston States as a carpenter, and returned to Cape Breton in later life to retire. And last but not least, one of my very important mentors, the late Jim Watson, who passed away in 2018, who really gave me a lot of support when I was first starting out with my fieldwork, and was very close to John Shaw when John was doing his fieldwork in Cape Breton. They organized a UNESCO recognized organization for the documentation and renewal of Gaelic called Cape Gale Associates in the 80s, and he worked in later years at the Nova Scotia Highland Village Museum, which is part of the Provincial Museum there, and does lots of work on the interpretation of Scottish Gaelic knowledge systems in the province. So when we look at the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, starting in the 18th century, the late 18th century of 1773 is given as a watershed moment, 1772 in PEI, we had Scottish Gaelic speakers coming to this part of what became the nation of Canada. And this data here, the red, is showing mother tongue speakers of Scottish Gaelic in the 1901 census of Canada. So you can see Anna's people were from Sight Point around here. Joe Peter McLean's from Boysdale. Peter Jack Christmas Island here. Teresa's were from just over in Bin Pond here. They grew up in places that were, when they were born, still majority Gaelic speaking communities. But what happened in the course of the next 50 years was linguistic tip. So we might say that we can look at this idea of the visit, of the Cayley, of visiting and going to visit. I did some work with Joe Peter McLean where we would drive around visiting people, and I started to realize after a while that the drives were as interesting to the fieldwork process as the destinations were, where we sat down and had a visit with someone and did some interviewing and played some music and had a conversation. So I started recording, and you can get a sense of what it looks like driving in these what were majority Gaelic speaking communities, but have been affected by outmigration and transformation over the 20th century, where there are not a lot of people left, and they've started to go back to nature. And this is a theme that we get in a few of the narratives. So you can just see what it looks like. So these would have been farmsteads. So that's a little example of that. And it's a funny story where they were saying they thought he and his father thought around one of the lakes, Lachamode, which is here, and this is a folk cartograph that he drew, and I sort of had me fill in at certain points, but heard a phantom piper in the distance, and they were wondering if it was a taish, if it was something that was, supernatural, or if it was just someone out, because there were in these communities founded mainly by people from the Southern Outer Hebrides, lots of pipers going up into the turn of the last century of Highland pipers there. So this is a map that Joe Peter drew. You can see the roads, the houses, the lakes that are all part of his cosmos, as it were, putting them on a Google map here to sort of orient it to us. And then I had a friend, Jake King, that works for the Einneolaíocht and Ahalapa, the Scottish Gaelic Place Names Project, showing me how to work writing them in print. So I took Joe's writing here and put in the lakes. But you can see we have these main settlements we have lakes that farmsteads would have been around. And then the very important part are these roads, these pathways, rachin, that people would connect to one another. And these are the pathways for the céilí, for creating communitas between the people, for sharing a sense of belonging and togetherness, for learning and accessing knowledge. This was the information highway of Joe's youth. So we have houses that would be accessed. We had institutions in the community. So you have the old schoolhouse, the sawmill, the still, all listed there. And then, of course, music in many of the houses, fiddlers, pipers, singers of Gaelic. So this is him just remembering his father going and visiting along these lines. And I think there's, when we look back on this, it's not that different than that opening quote from the storyteller, Sarah MacDonald, who is trekking out of that wonder tale, out of that version of Snow White, láthair. This is something that we go back to when we are remembering, when we're seeing in front of us a landscape that has gone back to a naturalized state that is devoid of a lot of the cultural markers, tangible ones that are there. This through Seanchas, through discourse, being able to recreate through a shared vision, through a discourse, those visions was just as important as what we were driving through, as what we were physically seeing. Okay,
then Angus MacDonald. All right.
Big man, you feel it's on the porch.
A big, okay. So waar nachher wessen dog and Donna walk of us in Donna down this is in the first to hook up.
Ah, we get to see us talk on first, wow.
It's Jacob at the first version when a row nachher for up.
Oh, yeah, we got céad meal.
Céad meal. So we got in a course of the show is.
You get the course of the show.
So run a hoe and get my pal channel show could you?
Oh, bad, get my pal channel, right? We then you can you some hollow call. We get the toe with kach.
Yes, this idea of gathering, going off together. He's remembering his parents as young people. When we were talking about rites and passage in the module earlier, people of a certain age would go off and go céilíing with one another in a social group where you got to know people from different families that you might end up, building lifelong relationships with. There's a lovely description, similarly, of people from the west and east villages in Tory and in Lillis's on a rock in the middle of the ocean of people gathering and singing, going from the east village into the west village in Tory. And so I think this was something that would have happened in a lot of communities where music was part of their everyday life. So I wanted to touch very briefly on some theory that I'm thinking about in the context of this, of disenchantment. And so Max Weber is one of the theoreticians that we know him from his discussions on Protestant work ethic, capitalism, and sort of a binary structure between modernity and traditional social worlds. What I want to touch on was this idea that the world remained a great enchanted realm, this is a quote from him, in which the practical way to orient oneself or to find security in this world or the next was to revere or coerce the spirits and seek salvation through ritualistic procedures. And we can say, oh, well, that sounds like, quite intense, but I think even the act of Seanchas, the act of remembering the past and the present, that discursive act of speaking and remembering, visualizing the past, is part of this trekking between enchantment and disenchantment. A recent scholar, Storm, has unpacked a little bit further Weber's writing on this and said, for there to be an active, ongoing disenchanting of the world, and every time we finish a tale, every time we leave the cohesion of the spiritual and physical unity of the céilí, we are going out of those, and we go to, and using the famous structures that Lillis gives us in Tory Island, trying to fight off the cold and keep up the chess and keep an iarchéime going. These are all symbolic and part of that. So we need magic to understand what isn't magical. Somewhere among some groups, it must survive. There must therefore be pockets, entire regions, groups, or classes where magic remains. And I think, in a lot of the places where I've done field work, it is this existing in the moment, looking back to the world of ancestors, discussing it in the present moment, and especially in the context of linguistic tip. So living through, and this is the only time this will happen when we think about it, since the 18th century establishment of these Gaelic-speaking communities in intergenerationally, we're 5-6 generations in Cape Breton Island. This is the first generation to witness its dispersal and dwindling in the community, and not just the language, but the communities themselves. So Mertz, in her study on linguistic tip in Cape Breton, said it was not a mere reflex of external pressures, but reflected Cape Bretoners' active interpretation of and struggle with changing circumstances, where tradition meets the changes they are facing. Even after transmission of Gaelic ceased in Cape Breton, and I'm happy to say now there are young people learning Gaelic through master and apprentice programs. Earlier in August, I was able to, thanks to digital connections we have now, to go to a folk life school through the meaning of Gaelic that John Shaw and Jim Watson started several years ago, and get to see and speak with people who are learning folk tales, who've gotten fluent in Gaelic, but we're memorizing tales, learning the higher register of language, and it's just a remarkable thing to see. So even after this ceased, the language ceased, they continued to use their language in creative ways. The importance of language in the community's repertoire cannot be assessed by mere mathematical frequency of use. It is the entire cultural, linguistic, ethno-linguistic framework through which speakers actively interpret their linguistic experience, which gives relative weight and meaning to particular linguistic usages. So living through these changes creates an emerging aesthetic that only exists in this moment, and it won't exist in the same way now, and it didn't exist in that way before. So we see, and here are some examples of this. This is looking out to site. This is called Ruin Chowley, Site Point, which is where Anna McKinnon grew up. Looking out from the front porch out to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, there where her father used to go out fishing, and they needed a winch to get the boats up. They had no place, but you can't see any of that. Again, all of the, I don't know if you can see the spruce trees that have come up. This would have all been high, steep farming. There would have been crops and food planted there, and you would have seen down to the shore where the fishing boat was lifted up. So this is her. And again, we're in the car driving, so that's why you hear a lot of ambient noise. But remembering, we're driving out to Site Point, and that physical movement through these physical spaces is that trekking in and out of enchantment, of memory, that's repeated. So this lamentation, this keening for that which has disappeared, looking out on the landscape that has changed so much in her own lifetime. And one thing that I want to say is, so we looked at, like Joe Pierce talking about physically visiting, going on the Ceilidh, as his parents did, as he did, learning to play the fiddle in his community, learning to speak Gaelic in his community. He only went to half a day of school his whole life, but he was constantly immersed in the Ceilidh school, that informal knowledge transfer of his community from the very beginning. So what we see here, and I wanted to bring attention to in this quote from Anna, is she's talking about up and down referential points to the place of where she was born, and moving to the place that she had to move to later in life for economic reasons, the main settlement of Inverness, Cape Breton, which was a mining center. And the juxtaposition she saw linguistically, culturally, and spatially, and the interesting thing is this up and down orientations we're seeing, I think are sense more about that. It's going back to that unitedness of spiritual connection with peoples and places, that it is more than just a topographical reference point. So we'll listen to that.
Ach rúin teaí a bheit
Barún Joe sin a bhréine íomh se gála go bhréine sé.
an Iarsta.
A púniúir go hiúsacha mar ó chuidir an cárach gána. Ú a tuirecha do chéalaí se gála go bheit
sé.
Agus ba se gála go bhecine go tuí, íhann tar a chuúchan me bhein, chum sin díomh se gála go chum sin sós. A gála go chuúaching.
I didn't transcribe that last part. She said, and our dog even had Gaelic. But this idea of that the language is emotionally connected to ancestors, to their mother, to the place she grew up, that is all being spoken of in these upward terms and then coming down from that upward position to the main settlement where Gaelic was not spoken at all, not at all. So we have that also this idea, you couldn't learn it. And that juxtaposition of of the same thing Lilith was touching on, of folam, this formal learning, versus tokol, this learning by lifting, and the keli as juxtapositions of knowledge systems for cultural expression and transmission. And she's, again, using these pathways to talk about the aesthetic changes in the music that have emerged in her lifetime. She was complaining about a fiddler, I won't name them, that just was playing way too fast. As Dan R. MacDonald, the famous fiddler, said, if you play that fast, you lose all the scenery and the tune. So all these spatial references when we go through tales, through tunes, and also the sensory idea that she's going to touch on here of taste, of having a gustatory satisfaction in the production of good music that creates well-being for all of those that experience it.
So mission am huis mi geisio so mi kind of get me henne na bigger coin you like show na heavy for a guy I mean you back a hoi ter a swore agus ba tos je boss na push boy and you listen to sana ha talach litana agus hat it tana rot was na haren Gaelic a fach gewoon het al in Gaelic en draast toch ook na haren je gewoon misje wat dat in heen agus hat kan gaan duwen is en daar was zien kan leggen agus een rotte wis misje vechting we kan nog eromheen còig fichead bliadhna sios heb ik speech en jouwstoel waar begaarde die jou heb ik skieuwen ik jong had shot ook aan ach me gewoon het soos dus je zou dat al jullie gaan.
So here we have this idea, if they keep this up, what else will happen? So just like she can look back to that and trek back to memory, almost like going back to the enchantment of the folktale, to the memory of when the language and the songs and the music were all connected in her community's aesthetic realm. Just like that, those memories can be maintained. They are pathways that can also be deviated from. Còig 25 years. Down the road, and if if they keep this up, what is going to happen? So it's her speaking about this threshold between what she remembers growing up with and what is emerging. So this brings me to sort of the main discussion of the narrative that I got the title for the talk from, and this is about a toperleish, a healing well that existed in Glengarry, which is the Culvecca, the little rears, the little back countries of Asafon Vaur in Big Pond, Cape Breton, where Teresa grew up, and her daughter Marion also grew up hearing Gaelic there. And this idea of cumach, of this power, she glosses it as believing in it. So talking about the well here.
Zijn toperleish, could you have going hole to one toperleish mineral spring? Yeah. Leish in the Vargos veins is mehesh.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Honami shin, I just should go a honami in the leish.
That is second doing your shin.
Could you bleeding in it?
Yeah.
And you listen, Jay, then I gave a kumuk of the yakata is on. Yeah. Nicht ga je het op een lezen, weet je, oh, en je karn, hoe je het karn mode was, en je een karn, je verder rond op de ritje, hij is agamsa na geef. Geen uiskillig, gewoon wat al, baas weet je. Wat doen we met dat talak het is like one frost, just like sorrow is like a cave was but Kubu Kuyo, like the son and Twitch, all some believe in it.
Believing it, yeah.
So we have set up this toper leish that existed that could heal. Leish in the varicose veins at Mahir. This healed my father's varicose veins, but that it was ruined, and also that it isn't in the spot where it was any longer. And in looking at some other narratives, we have the amazing book, I think it's just behind me here, in Irish contexts, Fish Stone Water, which is a great use of material from the archives and also photographic work that was done by Anne Rackard and Liam O'Callaghan. I started thinking about this idea of a movable, when things are disenchanted, they move, they're no longer available to the community. They've been polluted, profaned, destroyed, vigyag, chaya vigyag, vilate, we see here. So, and here's the second turn of it, where we get some of the other motifs that you see repeated in other legends about wells, which I think is a very interesting and creative use. It's being presented. It is existed, but the ways in which it is functioning in the context of the discourse to talk about her own sense of connection with the world in which she lives now as a mother tongue speaker, it's being used in an artful way. So we, of course, going to holy wells, I just put this up as an example because I never got to see this well. I never went back. I never saw the physical place with Teresa, but I took her word for it. She knew where it was. And this sort of is an image from Easter Ross, from Menlachi, looking at what it might have looked like. She describes it a bit more here.
Fair na jo fast so screw gius your shena a high sacum so jade bealach in the stoke. That crude mode spruce, crude mode juch is ba that's a shame. He do broken in crochwish na tarnin. He do latswick agus scree or do the first states as a whole hatch idea for a lot that can double late. So that she was a can double late. I vandalism had a hoolish and dear down. Yeah, no, this can do, and you're at the smell dear for machine to do York.
Yeah, so and you hear, and it's almost, I think the story's been heard multiple times because Marion is chiming in there. You can hear the affirmation of the Seanchas there. And the boogeyman here are the young people, the younger generation that doesn't share the same sense of enchantment in the landscape that she does when she looks back at it and considers the powers that this place had in bringing well-being to herself and those who came before her. So we have in Angela Bork's introduction to the Fish Stone Water book, she talks about these stories told at holy wells, retold in many places in this book. They're in some senses migratory, are brief but memorable and arresting. The well appeared when a saint shed tears on leaving this beautiful place, or water burst forth when a holy man struck the rock with his crozier. The well used to be some distance from where it is now until a woman profaned it by washing clothes in it, and it moved. So the idea of the things can move and change, and what Teresa said, that after the vandalism, they put up a cairn of memory to where it was, but it's almost as if the well and her, they knew better and where it actually was, and what the community remembered after breaking those ties with the past, with the world of ancestors, it would no longer reveal itself to the community. Often it is said that the mysterious trout or eels live in the well. And we can think of the Toper Shegesh and the well at the head of the Boyne River. Eating the salmon gave the gift of poetic vision, while now the water of a holy well cures sore eyes, and those who see the fish are blessed. And I would even bring into that, this whole ontology of expression of how we experience the expressive forms that are brought to fore in the gatherings of the Céilí. They're experienced in gustatory ways as well. The taste of the tune, the being, describing eating music, which if we have time, I'll play a few examples of that as well. So there was one example, Alison here from County Longford, that is in the volume, and it says, according to local tradition, a woman once washed clothes in the well, having been profaned, moved to another part of the field. So this is St. Patrick's well. People still visit on Pattern Day, the 15th of August. However, another Patrick's well near here is regarded as the one with the cure, particularly for warts. And warts were another thing. Fáinne was the Fáinne was another thing that Teresa brought up as something that the Toperleish would heal as well in our discussions. And we have it here again in the schools collection. I just wanted to bring this in. I think this might be the same or one of the two wells that the old well in the early 19th century still had trees growing above it, ash trees that were still alive, and one decayed. And then in 1937, the last one fell and the stump of it is still there. So we have these, the transformation of the physical landscape is experienced through our own memories of the world of the past, of ancestors in these very meaningful ways. So, yes, I'm bringing this up because I want to share with you one other version of the story, which we could say is this by form that we get of the story of the white serpent's flesh, where Finn McCool gets supernatural knowledge from the cooking of a salmon that he was set aside to prepare, but was told not to taste nor touch it, but did both inadvertently when he was trying to prepare it for his mentor, put his finger on the bubble and it burnt, stuck it in his mouth intuitively, and then got the imbus or the fhios, or that magical supernatural knowledge. And we get that also told about the many Carol O'Dowley's, the poet, getting that supernatural knowledge from the first milk of a cow. So here we have this version that I would say is, it's on that threshold between, the folk tale, the wonder tale, and the migratory legend. So 673, 3030 of the white snake from Scotland, but told in a very interesting way. And you can get this story from Scottish Traditional Tales, the anthology that Donald Archie MacDonald and Alan Bruford edited. And this is being told by a cousin of John McInnes's, Dunachug Duncan Matheson of Kintail, who was a great, you see him here in the photo from the picture archives, walking on handmade stilts that were used for going out and getting across rivers when you might be poaching deer or salmon. And so this is the end of the story. This is an addendum. So if you want to read the story, it's there about how St. Philin got this magical knowledge from tasting a cooked serpent's flesh. But we are also seeing here the end of it that's very similar to Teresa's story that we just heard.
Svafuran hawan galiwan agus svafuran a geri machas crew vehe agus ifawig na brain is a got shaun crew svafuran a geri mach na mean agus duske was an oren was schon valise geheen is a got vere vianach in le fulen.
So we have that this water was blessed by St. Philin and had the powers to heal. And then, of course, so it's very similar in structure. There is a body of water that has healing properties that existed, and then the turning point.
Agus waarvoor, sinang van wona linien, de linien, cos una gelung as faterash. Agus hij kocht toch dan ik panicher te raad. Agus wani uitig queen weske as een oren. Agus een oorske dreine zien hirimige voer aan de soos. Heile lees. Gare een oorske dreine show. Kan je fame in een dag hier. Heile voer aan de fame.
Yeah. So this idea of an external force, individual comes in, does not know the meaning of that toper, of that fuaren, uses it in the incorrect way, and then it loses its powers. So Teresa is using this, and here it's a traveling person, so that wasn't settled in the area and didn't know that knowledge is the person that it's being set on why it's no longer has healing properties, and that it no longer exists. And in the version from Teresa, it's the community that has forgotten its connections to the language and culture of the community that was once a majority language and culture within living memory. Again, going back to these ideas of disenchantment and that constant memory is this trekking back and forth, just like we can do with a wonder tale. We can do it in Seanchas and remembering the past through the frameworks of legend and belief. So something I wanted to touch on here was just getting towards the end. We can bring it. Well, I might open it up soon for discussion. Keith Basso's study, Wisdom Sits in Places, based on his fieldwork with the Western Apache, working on place name lore, has some very pertinent quotes that are tied to the sort of the magic of Seanchas and the ethics, the morality of it, as vibrantly felt, he says, as it is vividly imagined. So it's sensory. Sense of place asserts itself, and we sense place. We are using our còig fan to sense constantly the world around us, itself at varying levels of mental and emotional intensity. Whether it is lived in memory or experienced on the spot, the strength of its impact is commensurate with the richness of its contents, with the range and diversity of symbolic associations that swim within its reach and move it on its course. Like their ancestors before them, they display by word and deed that beyond the visible reality of the place that can have undergone drastic physical transformations lies a moral reality which they themselves have, through embodiment, come to embody. It is this interior landscape, the landscape of the moral imagination, that most deeply influences the Western Apache's vital sense of place, and also, I believe, their unshakable sense of self. And I think this fits very, very well with the narratives, the discourse, the Seanchas from these elders in Cape Breton. I don't know, I could finish there, but I have a few other, I wanted to sort of play with pathways a little bit more if we had time, talking about some symbolism of doorways, and then the idea of once you enter and get across the threshold, creating this cohesion in which everyone gets a singular unity to finish off. But I'm happy to finish there too. I know we're running close on time. Whatever. No, I have a few more. Yeah, whatever would work.
I mean, for everyone, please feel free to give some more examples if you like.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Is that all right?
Yeah, we'd be delighted, I think.
Okay, great. So this is a lovely photo here. This is Peter Jack, who we met earlier in the Petros Machjack Feterich Kalamagoa, the descendant of Kalamagoa who came over from the Isle of Beara. I like this photo that Ryan McDonald, who's a very good piper and photographer, took. This is where I would visit him. I don't know if you can see my cursor. This would not be on in the summer, so I would often set the recorder there, and then this is where we would be making tea and everything. So you had the two worlds meeting there, the old wood stove meeting with the new electric one, and I'd always, and maybe we would, we'd have sandwiches and maybe a little dram of dark rum. He liked to have that as well. So this is him remembering the Galduan at Oiche Chulak, Oiche Nakalukug, the night of Cowlins, Hogmanay, and we were talking about this. It was I think 20th of January. I was forgetting. So we had Old New Year had just passed. The funny thing about when Peter Jack and Joe Peter died on that same day, they died on the last day of the old year. So you used to celebrate, New Year's Eve between that 12th and 13th of January. And in South Uist, I have friends in Stony Bridge who are still there, are young people that go out first footing, and they would recite in Gaelic these Duan, these rhymes to get entry into the household and be given that gift exchange. Just like the bard had a patron and had to make a poem, a duan, to receive the duash from the patron, we have this reenacted in the ritual year in places like the Outer Hebrides and then within living memory in formerly Gaelic-speaking communities in Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island. This link. So this is Peter Jack remembering that, and then I'm going to play on the idea of doorways and as something that, and Henry Glassy writes some lovely descriptions of this, the doorway that opens and brings the community into the hearth, into the center of the community, but also can shut off and close people off, and the need to function within the confines of what is aesthetically acceptable and socially acceptable, to be able to traverse these and get across these thresholds. So we'll listen to Peter here. Yema to do one ago. Yeah, and then I think I must have cut off when I was editing there. They would be going together, gathering, going to the house where they would be gathering on New Year's Eve, and they'd have to recite a rhyme. I wouldn't get in at all. And we have, this image is actually Halloween. I love these photos that Margaret Faye Shaw took of Halloween geysers with their homemade costumes in South Uist. In Glendale, where she did her field work in the background. So there's descriptions of very similar, this would have been what was worn by some of the geysers within living memory. There's a description of that, and also carrying a bit of the neck skin of the goat that you would put around 3 times. You'd light in every house, creating that fire, and put it around 3 times in your head to bring a blessing for the new year, and pray that it didn't go out so that you would live for another year. So we have here this image of the doorway now being used to talk about proprietary, the songs in the oral tradition, they go back generations, but that sense of a song belonging to an individual in the moment in time in which you are living. So this is a nice description that Peter Jack has of this idea of a certain song belonging to someone, but using the image of the door as that and knocking on the door.
Sinna dána bhí a cead bhór fat na hóinnig. Bhí an cehéasnic. I got a pay over Gala Noran. Sinna dána ecasan na rá éice. Harada was to in Darasach feature.
Yeah, so that idea of the doorway as a place to, hold off the individual, where the individual meets the community, where the individual virtuosity meets the community, and the ways in which certain forms of expression might be known to belong to a certain tradition bearer, even though they're anonymous and we don't know their origins. They belong to the community in which they live in that moment, the lifeblood behind them. This makes me think, there's another anecdote from him about doors that is very reminiscent of, and it's about a ben of art, about a female poet from his community that his mother knew very well, Peter Jack's mother knew very well, but it's also similar to descriptions of the famous 17th century Harris and Skye poet Mary Alasdair, Mary Nina Alasdair, the Mary MacLeod, who was described, and this is from Father Alan Macmillan's Gaelic Words and Expressions from South US and Eriskay. So she couldn't make them inside or outside. So since she could not make them, she was, and this was for her writing praise songs to a child. We were talking about that in the Rites of Passage class earlier in the module today in the lecture, that unwanted praise. That MacLeod of Dunvegan was not happy when the nurse, Mary MacLeod, would write songs praising up his children because he thought it might bring on them ill fortune. So when she was forbidden from doing that, she loved songs so much that she found a way around this gesa, this geish, by sitting on the threshold and composing there. And we have a very similar description from Peter Jack about a bard, Benian Ruai, who was, or Benian Ruri, she has multiple ways of being styled in Gaelic, who was a famous famous poet in the community.
Ben and Ruidiat and Jay the Rain and Horan and Yannigish Horan.
Ian.
Seanchas a finish.
Yep.
Agus him with him who is great me here in the arrest. Agus him with these. A petty agus mad, dear cheeky gas a nash, cremission in the rago, mad a whole tire in the orc.
Ten down a cut yet?
A petty agus mad, dear cheeky gas a nash, cremission in the mad a whole tire in the orc.
Sure.
What do you think? This 100 chain go out of pound. She had in there since the weekend arrest.
Sure.
Yeah, she made it up just while she was standing at the door. And, you know, this idea of the power of especially female bards having this power to create extemporaneous verse. There's some nice descriptions in Brendan O'Madigan's function of Irish folk song in the 19th century that looks at similar descriptions. So it was very nice to come across this. And John recorded a very similar anecdote about the same Ben of Art, about Benny and Ruy, Katrina Benny and Ruy, that would give her songs about when she gave her songs to his mother Auna, who we see pictured here. And there's Peter Jack as a young person with his sister and their mother Annie McLean. And she said, Benny and Ruy, she taught these songs, the ones that she composed, to my mother Annie. And one day she was leaving. I guess this was like near the end of her own life. She stood at the door, Hesiek and Doris. She agus Huntahiri Mavar. So you can see like these motifs are repeated in different anecdotes about her. One about an extemporaneous song where she communicated that a funeral was going to happen in the neighborhood, but another one here about the discussion of how the songs were transmitted. And she said, Benny and Ruy said to my mom, now the songs I made and taught you, when you sing them, see that there's no hesitation in them. Nahoran orsisha raimisha yunsich mi guiv, no de gashu nahoran shen fiach orsisha nach bi gaun nach bi ag unta kamaleshko. She wanted the songs sung as she composed them. She wanted them to adhere, and that's the desire of every singer, is to maintain that oral text as from the person they learned it from. I remember doing field work with Rona Lightfoot and listening. She would sing songs from her mother and grandmother, and that she learned from their live singing and also from recordings. But naturally these organic variations come in, and we would listen to recordings after and notice, that these natural changes came, but their desire there was to adhere the word power of the text and to adhere to that form. So one other thing that came out of this, and I wanted to finish with the idea of eating. After a big ceilidh with Peter Jack, who was there the same year. I don't know if any of you, does anyone know the year that Dylan went electric? I'm trying to remember now. Was it 65 at the Newport Folk Festival? Does anyone know when Bob Dylan went electric? Yeah, is that right? This same year, there were singers from Cape Breton, Gaelic singers. Peter Jack was with them, the North Shore singers. He was singing on a stage at the same festival. So I think that's always a cool thing to mention. But I was visiting at a time where he was still at home and had a home care worker that would come and look after him. And we had been eating, and I made some ham sandwiches, and we had some some nice biscuits with jam. And the nurse had come in, the home nurse came in and asked, what would you like for dinner, Peter? And this is him remembering what he said to her.
Change your big how that's grind the shower and a big hurricane. The shower and a big, yeah.
You're the big, who's the big?
Yeah.
And we know that isn't necessarily true, that you would get food anytime. There were there were times where food was not readily available, especially after a long winter where you have the seed potatoes and the turnips and you're getting low, and you're trying to make sure you have enough to plant for the following crop, but that you also have food to feed yourself and your family. So Tresek, going back to her, talks about her mother's role in this, saying,
Een gemerkt zo vast nog gropenius, maak het toch weer toe, want dan enige aan het laf, big. En jullie zijn weer brisketje in de zee, maar ik kan gaan. Dan maak je een splash te bier, wat te bier.
No.
Hey, Tea, stew, hurricane to he, not go babe, cheva eagles.
Sure, I'm through.
Hold it on your tonic, just one eshka, you stow, you copy your gal or and such brew in the galix of
Seanchas.
oh, and you gadgets. Hey, I should be not going to do you. I lay the stress sound and dress, and you gad, you're glad. And you gad, you have the coin stuff that you're chaos.
Yeah, she's saying nobody laughs anymore. She uses the English word stress. It's so foreign that even with the real stresses of not always having, making the most of what was available to create this collective well-being. And this reminds me of all the silent work that goes into creating music in Ballymonone that Glassy writes about. You have these tiers of experience that go into creating the cohesion at the hearthside. That she said, if you laugh today, though, people might think, that there's something wrong with you. And so again, feeling this change and expressing it these ways. So I wanted to stop by listening to a few of these, just a few more examples of music being in people and it being so good that you would want to eat that music, that you would consume it, sort of tying into what Peter Jack was saying just 2 slides earlier.
Agus van cew under, agus agad agus llenad, ba chain hian yn ec brau hana fes. Mary Austin Road, Mary O'Donnell, by Dirach is shells na crying, just Bhéaloideas in new water. Oh, well, hi, dos bitu Dirach ga ich and back on me.
No, I'm a good shot.
I have when you shin fast hook down. I mean, in the push, so had the chuid, she are and Gaelic, if on the caillou and Hashach.
Shay.
Maybe at the end I'll play a clip if we have time of a little bit of. Look her up on YouTube and try to find somebody. She's an amazing fiddler, Alasdair who's pictured there with her daughter Mary Jessie, and there's John Shaw, who's I think just delighted to be in their presence. Another fiddler that we just lost recently, Teresa McClellan. She just passed away a few weeks ago. And there was a lovely, if you're on Facebook, there's a lovely tribute to her of just how we approach these rites of passage now, of a lot of the fiddlers in Cape Breton gathering around her graveside and playing some of her favorite tunes for her. Maybe we'll play it in the rites of passage class, but this is Anna talking about her, almost the virtuosity of her playing. In similar ways.
Oh, he's not going to kill. Oh, my cow, I can shit you. I can't kill what's in you. I want to sell it to Groga Icha. Let's show the whole Stephen Savannah.
Sure.
I tell you, me was the Scottish flavor. Yeah.
I'm Dutchin, yeah.
Look, you're coming to Harry Garlic, Kane. By maar dan hoor je me wat was nach pichelt of zo als van goed je kan niet eten. Daar heb je konen veel. Ja, J-Mail, maar je wist hem. Steven, you.
I didn't mean for it to do that, but you can hear Teresa in the background. Very nice hornpipe playing there, yeah. So the place where I want to finish then, again at the kitchen table, was this idea of once that unity is created, once you cross the threshold, once you remember through the performance of a piece that's tied to ancestors and shared in that live moment with others, this idea of creating a singular togetherness in that moment. And I'd like to finish with Peter Jack talking about this in the context first of fiddle and pipe music and then of singing. So chi and uncrea coming from that their singular heart, that shared heart between them, between the piper, the fiddler, and those gathered that would dance and tap their feet and keep time to the music and create that that metaphorical and physical warmth and togetherness that Joe Neal was talking about, that Lilith talks about in the Ichawar of Tory Island. And then just the last part about songs here.
Ik kan ook in de hele schreeuw. Wat is sporen bij pijn? Toch al geef. Het horen de gale, kan ik horen. Kan het weer horen. Zijn met de horen misat. En de maskerade toch al te jul in kassen. Koppel in kassen. Zij waren vrede, waren in die hele.
And I just thought I'd finish. I was going to play a clip from Peter Jack, maybe if we have time, but there's a lovely poem from Derek Thompson that I wanted to finish with here. Hatoper bek en mi en avala, some fear ga alwach, and fear goram suur ga blue huog, huur mi bra vohaun chalich. A horsti ham frirat foranyach. It's almost like talking to Teresa here. Faraminik a chashich mi lam cholken. San koken hain joag. Nur mi nahulten presoch. Chunami and ranach a fast mohoper asulen, seeing the well around her eyes and the bracken growing around them. Iska alwach fohirig is forunchen. Askagunag iskagunag. So a few things to think about today. Thank you very much for the invitation, Kelly, to talk. Tapali of Gamor, Goramaki. Thank you.